What's up YouTube, Saf here on Super Saf TV and welcome to another Super Saf style camera comparison. This time between the Huawei P20 Pro and the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. So in the usual format we'll be looking at both the front and rear facing cameras, images as well as video too. Do also look out for the audio icon in the corner of the screen and that will indicate to you which device the audio is coming from, and I'll be switching between these two throughout this video to give you guys a good idea of the differences in audio as well. So we're currently using the front facing cameras on both devices and we are taking a bit of a walk to test out stabilization. And now let's go ahead and run. Go just check out dynamic range, move around a little bit more. Now let's move on to the rear facing cameras. Right now we moved on to rear facing camera video, 4K at 30 frames a second. Now we do have the 2x optical zoom on the S9 Plus, which is going to allow us to get in a lot closer. With the P20 Pro, there is no button for optical zoom. You can, however, pinch to zoom. Now I don't know if this is optical or digital zoom. There is really nothing to tell me that. So just something to bear in mind. Now let's test out the stabilization. So we're just going to walk. And now let's run. Now we're going to be testing out the stabilization at 1080p. So starting off with a walk. And now run. Testing out the autofocus on the P20 Pro. Very, very fast. Now the S9 Plus. Dual pixel autofocus. As always, super, super fast. So that was a video. Now before we move on to images, if you do want to see lots of images from lots of different devices, then give me a follow on Instagram. I'm at SuperSaf. And let's have a quick look at what we're working with here. For the front facing cameras, the P20 Pro has a massive 24 megapixels versus 8 on the S9 Plus. However, the S9 Plus does have a wider aperture as well as autofocus. For the rear facing cameras, things are quite interesting. The S9 Plus has a dual camera setup, both 12 megapixels. The secondary camera is telephoto. That's going to give you 2x optical zoom with an f2.4 aperture. And the primary camera has a dual aperture, which is quite unique. And this is going to switch between f1.5 and f2.4 depending on the scene. Both cameras also have optical image stabilization. Now the P20 Pro has a triple camera setup. The primary is 40 megapixels RGB. Then we've got an 8 megapixel telephoto camera, which is going to give 3x optical zoom. And finally, there's a 20 megapixel monochrome camera. Huawei have also said that the sensor size of the P20 Pro is 170% larger compared to the S9 Plus. So we'll see how much of an effect this has in low light. Right, now kicking off with some selfies. Firstly, I have put beauty mode all the way down on both devices. And in terms of the angle of view, both are pretty wide and similar here. And both seem to be doing a good job overall. The P20 Pro is still smoothing out the skin even though beauty mode is switched off. And if we do go in 100% on both images, you can see that we can crop in much further on the P20 Pro because it has 24 megapixels. Now trying out the front-facing portrait mode on both devices, both actually doing a good job overall in terms of edge detection, but you can see here now the P20 Pro has blown out the highlights in the background. If we switch back to the original images, you can see that this is not the case. It only seems to happen when we are in portrait mode. Now trying out some selfies in low light, you can see here that we have the Eiffel Tower in the background. Now neither of these are doing a great job, but I do prefer the S9 Plus overall. The image seems sharper and we do have a bit more color on my face, whereas that has been lost on the P20 Pro. Using the front-facing flash on both devices, they are doing a much better job. A little bit yellowy on the P20 Pro. I do prefer the cooler tones on the S9 Plus here. Now let's move on to some outdoor shots. So here we have a macro shot of this flower. Both doing a great job overall. Great detail. Slight differences in color. I would say the S9 Plus is slightly more vibrant. And if we go in 100%, you can see that we can crop in much further on the P20 Pro because we are at 40 megapixels. Now trying out an outdoor wide shots, I do feel here that the S9 Plus has better dynamic range overall, and we are shooting at 40 megapixels on the P20 Pro. However, if we do switch to 10 megapixels on the P20 Pro, you can see that the image is sharper and has better dynamic range compared to 40 megapixels. Just quickly switching back and forth, it does look like the P20 Pro can apply more software processing when we are at 10 megapixels. I do, however, still prefer the S9 Plus for dynamic range overall here. Now testing out the optical zoom, we can go in 2 times on the S9 Plus, we can go in 3 times on the P20 Pro, and we also have 5 times hybrid zoom, which is going to allow us to get in much closer on the P20 Pro. Going in 100% at the maximum zoom on both devices, the P20 Pro definitely gets the advantage here. Now trying out an outdoor wide shot again, we are at 40 megapixels on the P20 Pro. The S9 Plus definitely has better dynamic range. But if we do go to 10 megapixels on the P20 Pro, then we can see that the shadows are boosted up so much more compared to 40 megapixels. Just switching back quickly, you can see that there is a massive difference. So I definitely recommend shooting at 10 megapixels on the P20 Pro rather than 40 in most situations. Now comparing this to the S9 Plus, it definitely has better overall dynamic range, but it might seem a little bit overprocessed to some, so this is going to come down to your personal preference. Now let's try out the portrait mode from the rear-facing cameras on both devices. I think both are doing great in terms of edge detection. Now we've got warmer tones on the S9 Plus, whereas we've got cooler tones on the P20 Pro, and we've also got a different angle of view on the P20 Pro because we are using the primary camera here. However, when we do use the zoom option, you can see that we have a much better angle of view for portraits, but the image is a lot softer compared to the primary camera. Now another shot here, once again that difference in color. I think overall edge detection is great on both devices. And once again that angle of view, so if we do use the optical zoom here, we get a much better portrait angle on the P20 Pro, but the image is softer. Once again that color difference, much warmer on the S9 Plus, much cooler on the P20 Pro. Overall, I do think both are doing a great job, and I think it's going to come down to personal preference. Now let's move on to low light. This is something that I know a lot of you guys are interested in seeing. And initially a low light indoor shot using automatic settings. The S9 Plus doing a much better job here, and that is thanks to the super wide f1.5 aperture. However, if we do switch on night mode on the P20 Pro, then we get in much more light because of that longer exposure. And if we go in 200%, you can see that the P20 Pro is sharper with less noise compared to the S9 Plus. The colors, however, have been slightly muted on the P20 Pro, I think, whereas the S9 Plus has maintained the colors a little bit better, I feel. Now moving outdoors in low light, I think both are doing a great job here. We have used night mode again on the P20 Pro, and if we go in 200%, I think overall I do prefer the S9 Plus image here. Once again, the colors have been maintained a little bit better, whereas they have been slightly muted on the P20 Pro. Now another outdoor shot, and switching back to the automatic mode on the P20 Pro, I think even with the automatic mode here, it is doing better compared to the S9 Plus. The S9 Plus has blown out those lights on the Eiffel Tower, whereas those have been maintained on the P20 Pro. There is a little bit more noise on the P20 Pro in the clouds, however, compared to the S9 Plus. But if we do use the night mode here on the P20 Pro, then we do get a brighter shot overall with less noise. Now moving on to our final low light test, this is on automatic on both. Both doing a good job overall. The colors are more vibrant on the S9 Plus here. Now switching to the night mode on the P20 Pro, once again you can see that the colors do drop here. If we switch back and forth from automatic to the night mode, you can see the difference here in colors. When we do switch to night mode, then the colors do get more muted. Definitely something to bear in mind. And if we go in 200%, the S9 Plus doing a better job here. You can see that the image is sharper. And if we look at the reds here, you can see that the colors have been better maintained on the S9 Plus compared to the P20 Pro. So there we have it, guys, the Super SAF style camera comparison between the Huawei P20 Pro and the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. In terms of my opinions, when it comes to selfies in good light, I think it was a bit of a draw. You do get more resolution on the P20 Pro, but you get better dynamic range in portrait mode on the S9 Plus. The P20 Pro also does smoothen the skin even when beauty mode is off. And I've mentioned this before, but this beauty mode is a real headache for me. It's on by default, and when you're shooting video from the front-facing camera, it's at 720p. And if you do want 1080p, then you need to switch this off, and that is a small icon in the corner of the screen. So this is really bad user interface. When we do switch this off, we do finally get 1080p, and the front-facing video quality is actually pretty decent. But when you compare it to the S9 Plus, the S9 Plus has better dynamic range, and it also seemed more stable to me. Both do crop in to achieve stabilization, but the P20 Pro seems to crop in more compared to the S9 Plus. I also did prefer the S9 Plus for low light selfies overall, and when it comes to rear facing camera images, I think it was a bit of a draw overall. Yes, you do have the advantage of 40 megapixels on the P20 Pro, but you don't get as good dynamic range, so the 40 megapixels is probably something that I wouldn't shoot at in most situations. For dynamic range, I think it was a bit of a draw. You had better dynamic range on the S9 Plus in some situations, and better dynamic range on the P20 Pro in others. The P20 Pro does get the win for zoom, however. You can get in much closer thanks to that 5x hybrid zoom. And when it came to low light, it was a bit of a draw once again for me. I preferred some images on the P20 Pro thanks to that night mode, but the P20 Pro does mute the colors a lot in low light compared to the S9 Plus, which I did prefer in some situations. Now for the rear facing camera portrait, I think both were good overall in edges. We had cooler tones on the P20 Pro with warmer tones on the S9 Plus, but the S9 Plus was sharper overall. And that is once again because of that beauty mode on the P20 Pro, which even when it's switched all the way down to 0, still does try to smoothen your skin, resulting in a softer overall image. For video, hands down the S9 was the winner. I still can't believe that there is no stabilization at 4K on the P20 Pro. And even though at 1080p the footage was much more stable, it turned soft on the P20 Pro. You also have 4K at 60 frames a second on the S9 Plus. This is something that I couldn't really demonstrate in this video because it is exported out at 30 frames a second. And I'd also have to give the overall win for slow motion to the S9 Plus. Although both of them have a short burst at 960 frames a second 720p, the S9 Plus has automatic motion detection, which makes capturing that short burst so much easier. For audio recording, I think both were actually good overall. They both do record in stereo sound. Personally, I did prefer the S9 Plus slightly better, but I'll let you go back and have a listen if you'd like. That's what I think anyway. What do you guys think? Definitely drop me a comment below and let me know. If you want to see lots of images from lots of different devices, then give me a follow on Instagram. I'm at SuperSaf. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then do hit that thumbs up button for me. And if you haven't already, then be sure to subscribe and switch on notifications. There's lots more content coming up in here. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on SuperSaf TV, and I'll see you next time.